Hi, I'm Drew Hutchison. You're tuned to Local Bias. We come to you from the studios at Easthampton Media on Pleasant Street in beautiful downtown Easthampton. We were produced since 2006 at Greenfield Community Television. So this isn't our first rodeo, I would say. However, it is our first rodeo here in this lovely studio, and I'm mangling my words, but that's okay because this is local cable. My guest is Karl Meyer. Karl, thank you for coming on the show.
Drew, this is sort of a little reunion for Local Bias.
It is.
Local Bias too.
I went on hiatus in March, and the Connecticut River continued to flow, sometimes backwards. And so you're joining us today to let us know where we're at with the Federal Energy Relicensing Commission and the process regarding the Northfield Mountain Pump Storage Facility.
As we have done, you said probably a dozen times now. Mm-hmm. We're probably in the 15 to 20 year range. You're almost 20 years old doing this show, but I wasn't on early. Do you want to just jump in, or do you want to talk about the little piece that sort of attracted you to me at this point?
Well, I mean, I did read in the Recorder your My Turn column.
Yeah.
And it was informative to me because FERC had held a hearing at GCC.
Yeah.
So let's just tell us about that particular hearing.
All right, we'll start a little bit earlier because we're talking about the Northfield Mountain Pump Storage Station and the Turners Falls Hydro projects.
Right.
Upriver from here, about, 25 miles or so.
Okay.
To 30 miles. Their licenses expired in 2018, and that's the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission licenses. We started negotiating about the licenses and meeting in 2012. So we've been at this now, Drew, for 13 years. It was supposed to be a 5-year process, right? So we have gone through this, and there are other shows to go through. But there was a meeting, there was a public testimony meeting by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the first sort of public meeting that they had showed up to since I don't know when in this process. And I've been involved every step of the way for these last 13 years. I was riding a tricycle.
You are an official intervener.
I'm an intervener. I'm a member of the Fish and Aquatic Studies team. I have an environmental science degree, and just in all aspects, plus my journalism and writing about the river for the last 25 or more years. So anyway, people come to this meeting, think they're going to accept public testimony, and in the end, they just take everybody into a little room where you speak into a microphone with a transcriptor. It's like the 1950s, and somebody is actually writing down your testimony. They actually did record it, but you were not allowed to testify in front of people, and that's been part of my problem all along, is the public doesn't have the facts. So I came down here today looking at this as, let's call it the ground truth sort of Connecticut River relicensing program. This is the public has a right to know. And that's what I've sort of been throwing stuff up against the wall for all this last time.
Have you gotten any traction?
Drew, let me see. as the article said, I was the only person that got a hearing down in Washington, D.C. because I intervened when First Light, which is the owner of Northfield Mountain and Turners Falls, they came in 2016, and 2 years later they broke up their assets. They're a giant PSP Investments, Canadian and global $250 billion global investment firm. And they came up and they broke up those assets. Turners Falls and Cabot Station and Station 1 got put into Delaware tax shelters. Right. Northfield Mountain, the big cash cow, got put into a different tax shelter. And this deprived the public and these towns of the tax money, that generally has been accepted for time immemorial, right?
So they were receiving payment in lieu of taxes, or tax payments themselves, the towns, and now they're not.
The towns were getting regular taxes, like you used to. You'd have
because a corporation is in town operating, they pay taxes.
You assess what the assets are worth, right? And these things are. But if you move them out of the state, then you're not, Delaware is like the tax shelter heaven of the east coast of Massachusetts, right?
Right, of the country.
And so there's that. But the thing that I have sort of kept on in these hearings and these licensing studies or whatever, I've just tried to get out the ground truth about the monstrousness of the Northfield Mountain Pump Storage Station, right? And the basic things are, this is a massive gas and nuclear powered plant. It's not hydro, okay?
Right, it's not green.
It's not green. And I'll show you a few videos in a second. Massively sucks the river backward for miles, sometimes pushes it back when they flush water out of it. Northfield acts like an electrical powered toilet, basically an electric toilet. You suck water up to this giant reservoir, and then when there's high demand and there's high prices, you flush the water out. But everything that gets sucked in there, and that happens at 15,000 cubic feet per second for hours at a time, which is the equivalent about of 7 3-bedroom homes, all the aquatic stuff in there, 15,000 cubic, 1 per second, 3,600 an hour, and nothing, not a single thing that gets sucked into those round-trip turbines at Northfield Mountain has any expectation of survival.
And it does suck up the native.
It sucks up juvenile. There are 24 or more species that inhabit that 20 miles of river between Turner's Falls Dam and Vernon Dam, which is upstream, right? So we're down in the lower part of the river right now, and all those fish are vulnerable, but particularly migratory fish.
Right.
And decisions were made back in the late 60s, before Northfield got completed, that we're supposed to take care of migratory fish, because this was a river that is still supposed to be feeding us, right? Every spring, from Native Americans to prehistoric peoples that were related to the Nipmuc and Abenaki, that would be the thing, the sustaining thing, were the fish that came in that lean time at the end of winter and early spring when crops aren't up yet. This was supposed to feed us. Even into 1967, when they had this fish cooperative and the federal and state agencies got together for this New England Fisheries Cooperative, the two goals were create a new source and create recreational fishing, plus a source of seafood for the public.
Right.
And that was the mandate.
That was our commons.
That was the mandate.
Right.
And did it happen? It had already happened just down the road here at Holyoke. Holyoke's maybe 7 miles downstream. Right. We had a basic fish lift in there since 1955, right? Right. And when these hearings came up to what were we going to do upstream at Turner's Falls, because that dam had blocked anadromous fish forever, Holyoke was already working. By 1975 and 6, it was passing hundreds of thousands of shad every year, right? And we are just I was thinking about this, Drew. I've been around long enough now that I'm sort of one of the keepers of, I'm kind of the, what do you call it, institutional memory now of this. These are 1975 Federal Power Commission hearings that took place in Boston about what they were going to do for Turner's Falls Fishway. And when they were doing these hearings, they had already stopped prioritizing shad, which were the basic meat of the bones of what
it was salmon all of a sudden became.
All of a sudden, salmon had been extinct since 1809. This is where they made the first giant mistake on the Connecticut River 50 years ago. August 1975, exactly 50 years ago. And they decided to build a 3-ladder system that took every anadromous fish, blueback herring, shad, eels,
short-nosed sturgeon.
Short-nosed sturgeon don't go up that far in the river per se, historically. They decided that all those fish would have to take a right into the canal.
Which they would naturally do.
They'd have to go up 3 ladders instead of building the clunky basic. Holyoke is the most successful
old technology
fish
and it works.
lift on the entire East Coast, right? They decided on this thing because it was based on, they were passing salmon, many species of salmon on the mighty Columbia River, where they had already transported American shad, which shouldn't belong in the Pacific, but they were. So this giant river and these giant fish ladders were working there. They scaled them down, and they worked for the few manufactured salmon. There were no salmon here, right?
Right.
You had to,
they had to stock them.
They built this crazy hatcheries, got all the attention. Well, the few salmon that got past Holyoke every year could just zip by, right? But there never were many. The shad, nothing, all right? Just about. I forget, some years it was like 1% passage, and that's where we are now. That's where we are today, when the license should have been completed by 2018, right? But we have this company, First Light, happy, got all this money with PSP investment, happy to just drag this thing out, right? So now we're 8 and 7. We're 7 years past it, right? We're still dickering over this. By the time they finally put a lift in at Turner's Falls, like they could have done here in 1980 at Turner's Falls when this got happened, it's going to be 2037. They're going to have 20 years of freebie. That's where the money is. That's what they owe the public. They owe the public this fish passage. But by the time they put, they've had a license that they haven't really spent any money on because they could keep all the agencies busy, and we haven't had either the federal or state, the Mass Department of Environmental Protection, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries. Nobody's ever stood up for the river.
Why? Why haven't they?
Corporate capture is one of the terms that
or
you
regulatory
use,
capture, right?
Regulatory, it's sort of like, well, we'll wait until the relicensing. Nobody wanted to go toe to toe and enforce, right? We have things on the books, but there's no regulation and there is no enforcement. And we've never had an NGO on this river. The Watershed Council has been around since 25 years before Northfield got built.
Right.
They were around, right? And what's the other one? I'm not coming up with the name. Nature Conservancy, sort of jumps in on this. They don't go to court, right? Watershed Council, I worked for them twice. I worked for them, I did a paper for them in 1995 about rebuilding the Northfield Dam when they were right here in Easthampton.
Right.
And then I worked for them again in 2006, 2007, something like that. They just aren't the organization that was ever going to go. Their board was involved with Northeast Utilities, which is sort of basically the wires that go up to Northfield are still Northeast Utilities. All of it's been captured by the corporations, right? And now we're tearing down any kind of regulation, and now we're hollowing out. We're hollowing out even the institutions that didn't go to bat, that didn't fight.
Right.
So this is where we are.
But also, isn't there the
good news,
Endangered Species Act involved? I mean, Northfield Mount Herman wasn't it, the pump storage? It was built after the Endangered Species Act, or right before it.
Yeah, but the Endangered Species Act.
Because short-nosed sturgeon are endangered.
Well, right? No. Well, let me explain what's going on with short-nosed sturgeon. Traditionally and historically, one of the experts, Boyd Kennard, his understanding of this river, and he studied it for a long time, is that sturgeon came up, and we've historically known that they spawned at the below the Second Falls on East Coast rivers with this profile, and there is history of them spawning at the Rock Dam in Turner's Falls, below the Turner's Falls Dam. But the real damage, the real killer, is up at Northfield, Drew. So we're not really talking a whole lot about endangered species. There is some new eDNA stuff that's above my pay grade in some ways, but also the fact that it's an argument that is never going to be acted on. We're talking about actionable stuff, right? Northfield is a killer because, and we finally get to this. This is the river with four turbines pumping when at the dam. I think the dam height is 176 feet. Right, so anyway, so this is the Franklin County Technical School out by the Turners Falls Airport. This river is actually being sucked backwards, right? This is the French King Bridge over here. These are the power. Northfield is up here. This massive thing, everything that goes in there. So this is about from 0 to 2 and 3 feet per second, right? And this can happen for hours, right? This is when they suck the river up at night.
When I lived in Gill, I used to hear the room of the water being pulled up.
It is just a wild stuff. And you know, one of the arguments I made in this piece is, so how does Northfield operate? They love to include hydro in the thing, but it's just really the weight of water. They could do this with dumbbells. If they wanted to lift dumbbells up, you know, on a big thing, it doesn't have to be water. Doesn't have to be the Great Connecticut River, you know, it's a national treasure and all this kind of stuff. Well, this is exactly a month ago. I checked what Northfield was running on any particular day. This is like 60% natural gas. This is nuclear. Let me see, what do we got here? This is imported energy. This is, the blue is actual, we have a tiny bit of actual hydro in New England. This is the entire, and I looked today, this was at 67%. This is your children and grandchildren's future. We are cooking this river. And you know who's responsible for this? This comes out of ISO New England, right down the road in Holyoke. Right. Who does not recognize climate change, just like FERC. They're sort of FERC's little brother around here.
You mean they actually don't recognize?
They're sort of the market. They're marketers, right? Their responsibility for two things, just like Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Their quantity and price. All they care about is making sure that there's a glut of electricity out there, and it's cheap enough so even the poor people can just squeeze by being able to afford it, right? It's basically run by the corporations. I consider ISO and FERC, it's a market, and they're like the pharmacy benefit managers. You know, they're just out there selling us, and they never tell us to cut back, right? Right. And at least 3 times during these last 3 heat waves we've had, I get, and you can go on, by the way, you can get this up to the date, up to the second. You go to ISO New England real time. Just Google that in. You can see this up to the second, what's going on ISO New England's chart, right? But during the last 3 heat waves, I signed up a long time ago on a list that lets me know when we're sort of in trouble, when there's not enough, you know, they never tell the public that, you know, we're getting close to sort of maxing out on how much juice we can, you know, air condition ourselves and game ourselves to death and casino, you know, online gaming and AI. And so every one of these last 3, I get these emergencies where we are cutting back on exporting transactions. So in other words, a lot of the energy that gets brought here, first of all, is natural gas or sucked up Northfield to suck up natural gas. They export it to where they can get the highest price from. And they're never going to tell us that we should be using less, and that's how we are starting to cook, right? That is how, because they never want us to think about how we use energy, right? They are failing the future.
And I think something that people need to understand is that when you use AI, you're using energy.
Immense amounts.
Immense amounts of energy.
And so, and I got one more. I got one more little thing.
Let's see it.
This is from yesterday, and this, you know, so that was when that first big illustration was Northfield sucking water up to the top of its hill. This is when they release water at 20,000 cubic feet per second. This is a chart from yesterday, and you can see this is about 5 or 6 days in August up to August 14th. And this is like zero flow. You know, this is charting the flow of the river, right? So the river is going. You know, this the river's flowing downstream. You got to look at this sort of opposite. Okay. But so this is like, if you're at Northfield Mountain and they're generating electricity at 20,000, big flush of a toilet. Right. This is pushing the river to this deadline, right? It stops it north. This is going up towards, it's pushing the river up towards New Hampshire and Vermont, and it's pushing it up towards Northfield. And this is the zero line, right? So you basically have a dead river here. But this is the river actually going backwards, right? I don't know exactly where this is, but this is up by Route 10 and sort of towards Route 10 in Northfield where it crosses the Connecticut River. But this represents hours of a river flowing backwards. We do not have a living river in the 20-mile reach that is Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. This is an abomination.
It is an abomination.
So
I'm sorry, but
no, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Well, the thing is, the river is a living entity. I'm sorry, but I mean, there is this idea that we are separate from the trees and from the grass and the weeds and the cows. How we treat everything is how we treat ourselves. And that is an abomination. That is, the river needs to flow the way it's supposed to flow. That's just, it just feels so wrong to me. And I wish I can articulate it better. But it is an affront to my own sensibilities. But it seems like, well, you got to think about the poor shareholders, right, Karl? I mean, isn't that what it's about? The wealth junkies got to get another fix?
Algorithmic. And the money, of course, it's getting rinsed out in Delaware, and it's going up to Canada.
Right.
Really, you know, and they have clawed back what used to be paid in taxes. They actually, the town of Montague, I don't know how many other towns are actually having to pay money back from, you know, they have this legal team. I forget, they have a DC law firm, and now they're using something called Foley Hoag, which is a big Boston law firm. They have tried to separate me out as a stakeholder and an intervener in this process, and they've done pretty well. But here we are talking, Drew, which is one thing, and so it's been a little bit of a cat and mouse game.
Well, and that's one reason why I ask you. For instance, you've been on the program many times over the years because you understand this issue so well. And I asked you, well, are you getting any traction? Are there people getting in touch with you saying, look, I want to help out, what can I do?
Well, it is kind of funny. As this thing sort of came to a close in Massachusetts, the DEP sort of just whitewashed my whole argument about the fact that the Clean Water Act doesn't allow a river to flow backwards.
Right.
And the opening part of my article was that the Clean Water Act, I think, was authorized by Congress October 18th, 1972. Northfield, 6 months earlier in April, was just about being completed when a valve broke in their cavernous power station, their powerhouse, and all their control. The entire thing flooded, and they didn't come online until 1973 when the Clean Water Act was enforced. So what does that make them subject to? Federal law, state law, okay? And I don't know of any federal law, state law that lets a plant that kills virtually everything that it sucks in, that pushes and sucks a river backward for virtually miles. And then my other argument, of course, has been that I found out in a footnote. FERC had asked First Light for additional information requests, they're called. And there was this little footnote, and it says that Northfield's pumping, and they gave like a 10-year skew, how much energy it takes to suck the river up, mm-hmm. right into this giant reservoir using gas,
right.
to this gas plant, and nuclear from like 100 miles away, or Seabrook or Millstone. And it turns out it's 1.34, meaning that it takes 34% more energy to get the river up there than it has. Basically, that brings them to baseline before they even turn out a recycled, expensive water.
And they're trying to call it hydropower, and it's anything but. It's gravity power.
It's a mad. It's massive waste, right? It is massive waste, and as I argued, you could have either that natural gas would have stayed in the ground, or you could have powered 340,000 homes,
right.
with the energy that is wasted by doing this. And can we live without this plant? We have many times, and they've been offline for half a year. They've been offline for this plant should have been. We should have been talking about reducing this to emergency use only years ago, and so now, 50 years beyond the first mistake on the Connecticut River, we have two two entities that are in negotiations right now to let this thing run for another 30 to 50 years. And they both have rivers in their names, right? American Rivers and the Connecticut River Conservancy. They're doing business. They're still the Connecticut River Watershed Council. And, you know, you come in and you don't do anything, and then you're playing for parting gifts, highly frustrating. Highly frustrating. But well, you and I, Drew, we're here till the last dog dies.
Well, yes. I don't know about the last dog. But when you were at the GCC forum, or whatever you want to call that,
yes,
was there anything that came out of it that gave you any sense of hope?
The one thing that was unusual was that I met somebody named Steve Cartalia, right? And I, having been in this for 13 years, Steve Cartalia is one of the FERC guys that's in the background, that you see their name on things, but, and some guy, you write down your name and, hi, I'm Steve, and he's going to take me into the little room where, two people are recording their things, and I said, "You're not Steve Cartalia, are you?" He goes, "Yes." And I cursed. I was just so flummoxed and just surprised to sort of meet somebody, right? This is all siloed stuff, right? DEP hearings, the whole bit. And that's really what I've worked the way I have all this time as a journalist, to try to flush this stuff out in the open without having to go through the spoke people,
right.
Because you never get any information out.
That's right.
So I have to thank you for this platform, and I've many papers, Commonwealth Journal, Vermont Digger. There have been virtually thousands of
articles. And you were on WHMP, was it? With
yeah, we used to do Bob Flaherty and I did this, and I've been out with Buzz and Buzz Eisenberg and stuff. We try to keep it out there because the people that should be talking have never talked, right? And the heartbreaking piece, you asked me if there was anything really sort of, and they're not talking about a river that goes backwards. I was just, there's some really sad things about this. I just, every now and then, every year I go up and there's a Pecumtuck Homelands Festival, right? Abenaki, Nipmuc people from the tribes all over the place, Mohawk.
The Wasatinaw.
But they do it on First Light's property, and they get money from First Light, and you have all these people there behind the Turners Falls Dam, and you have this dead river behind you, right? The river that is actually, and it's sort of like you're getting your language stolen for a second time, because they do not talk about what First Light is doing to that body of water, and it just makes me sad. And it's I just go there and I just,
who are the river stewards?
The Watershed Council likes to think that they're the river stewards, but they're going into underground negotiations. I withdrew because there is a movement. DEP signed off, and so did the Watershed Council, and so did FERC. FERC and DEP both guarantee under First Light's non-disclosure agreement, right? This whole confidentiality thing, and that's why
that's why you won't sign that, right?
And I said, if there's any request for information that is coming to DEP, public agency, or FERC during these negotiations, or information learned here or information being exchanged, you have to let all the other stakeholders who have signed non-disclosure agreements know. So basically it's a tattletale, let's keep these things under wraps. And I said, I'm not doing that.
What's the point of keeping it under wraps unless you feel that it's not something that the public really feels is in their best interest?
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, and the power company has all, PSB investments. They Foley Hoag, and I forget the DC law firm that's been with them the whole time. But Foley Hoag is handling this, and the interesting, Martha Coakley, who's the woman that was a CEO of First Light for a couple of years, who became a big wind person. They both came through Foley Hoag. They're both lawyers, So it's pretty incestuous, shall we say. How are we doing here? How are we doing for time?
We're just about out of time, Karl. It's amazing
that you... We're doing a show. So let me just, usually Drew ends up asking me, what can people do?
Well, that's what I want to know. What's practical?
I mean, the one good thing that came out of the GCC things, I threw it in the paper.
Right.
You know, but they're. I was talking to a friend of mine. I don't know if you know Claire Higgins.
Oh,
Actually,
yes.
you do know Claire. Well, we had
Used to be
lunch
the mayor of
recently,
Northampton.
and you know, I was complaining about the fact that all of a sudden people got interested in me way after the water quality. You know, all of a sudden I'm getting these calls from people. You know, it's sort of like with ideas, and people joined into the fight a decade in, right?
Right.
And you know, as Claire put it, it's like you read the whole 13-chapter book, and they came in, skimmed the last 2, and then wanted to be stakeholders, and they want to be part of the scene, which doesn't really work unless you really play catch up, and you got to go to the you got to.
And yet, Karl, you do need to encourage people to be your ally.
Right. Well, I understand that, but as a journalist, I don't get to do that. Right. I get to put the facts out there, and then you know what you choose to do. If you choose to act, that's up to you, right? But for a decade or more, okay, everything dies. The river runs backwards, it's a waste, and you have to at least educate yourself, right? And you know, there were people that I sent to a lawyer, to a real prominent lawyer out in Eastern Mass. I said, if you want to get serious and you're coming in now, this is who you need to talk to. And they were kind of here are the basics. You have to stay in this fight, you have to have the court of public opinion with you all the time, and you got to get into a courtroom, which I was telling them beforehand, right? So you have to do those things, which means you have to work day after day after day and commit yourself to the process and find your way into court. And people weren't willing to do it, right? So what I would say to people right now, we have a lot of smart people in this valley. That's up to you. Find a way in if you can. Okay. You know, but you know, we're going to be here. But you know, it's sort of, I think my job has been to tell the truth and understand the story. And I live with this every day. Right. And so when people say, well, I need to do this or do that or talk to people, I needed to know that people were serious the whole time, because I've always been begging for a lawyer. I've always begged for a lawyer. Come and represent me. Right. But you had to make yourself a serious player in this organization in order to be taken seriously. I'm still in the fight, Drew.
All right. Well, thank you.
Send lawyers, guns, and money.
All right. Well, Karl, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on and informing the public of where we're at in this process. There is still room for people to jump on board and be part of the solution. I'm Drew Hutchison. You've been tuned to Local Bias. We come to you from Easthampton Media, and we will be shown throughout the Pioneer Valley, the Connecticut River Valley. Today we're talking about the Connecticut River. I hope you join us in the future, and take care.